Hi guys, Totallydubbed here, and today I'm doing a video review on the AOC CQ27G2U. Now this is an insanely cheap 1440p 144Hz monitor. The CQ model is the curved variant, which you can see in front of you, and it can be found for around £260 to £280. The non-curved version, the C27 version, can be found for around £260. That is insane considering most VA-based panels with this sort of spec can be found for around £400. So without further ado, let's get into the review. So first off, in the specs, what do you get for that money? Well, it's a 1440p panel, 27 inch. As I mentioned before, 144Hz, it's got a 1 millisecond MPRT quoted response time, VA panel, again as I mentioned. In terms of its FreeSync range, it's got 48Hz to 144Hz. That's adaptive sync, and yes, before you ask, it does work with NVIDIA G-Sync, at least if you connect it over DisplayPort running the latest drivers, and in my case I have an RTX 2080 Super and I had no issues whatsoever when it came to running the NVIDIA Pendulum demo. Now moving on from that, you've also got two built-in 2-watt speakers, which are perfectly fine for Windows notifications, but I wouldn't use them for anything else. You've got HDMI 2.0, two of those ports, and DisplayPort 1.2, which is fantastic if you want to connect up a console and or a Blu-ray player and even your PC. You've got a USB hub, which has 4 USB 3.0 ports at the back. You've got line input and output via 3.5mm jacks. Essentially, you've got all the specs you might expect, and on top of that, you've also got a VESA 100x100 mount if you so wish to change a stand. Now, the stand itself is actually really good. It's a triangular stand. It's plastic, but it does provide all the adjustments that you'd like. Now, in terms of height, tilt, and pivot, in terms of rotating, as you can see, it doesn't rotate, but that said, why would you want to rotate it, given it's a gaming monitor? So I have no sorts of issues right there. The stand itself is a little bit wobbly. It does provide a little bit of wobble, but in all honesty, even if you're raging at your keyboard, you're not going to have too many issues. Now, in terms of the design, it's got a 3-sided borderless design with a slightly thicker bezel at the bottom. Again, nothing to be overly concerned about. The bezels aren't exactly as thin as some other monitors that you might find out there in terms of the screen to body ratio. However, it still looks fantastic, and as I mentioned before, this is the curved variant, so it's got a slight curvature, meaning that you might or might not feel slightly more immersed. Of course, it's subjective as to if you do like a curvature or not. I had no issues in terms of viewing angles with the curved model, specifically in terms of any sort of tail off in terms of text on the corners of the monitor. No issues whatsoever. So on the whole, I must say it's a pretty well built pretty well built monitor. Now, the OSD controls do drive me insane, and that's because of the button placement. They are at the bottom right-hand side of the monitor. I'm just going to go into the OSD so you guys can actually see it. The reason why it actually annoys me is because it's off-center. You can see the first button, which is the on and off button, is over here where my finger is, and usually you'd find them on the corner. So it's somewhat hard to see, and then the actual logos themselves, the actual buttons themselves, are pretty hard to see as to what they are. So aside that, the actual OSD itself is really comprehensive, and it provides you all these sets of options that you might need or want from a gaming monitor. Now, you might realize that my brightness is really set to the lowest mode. That's because of my camera to pick it up. Right now, I do apologize that my room is very dim. I haven't got my normal light with me, and so therefore that's why I had to really bring down the brightness. But other than that, the settings, I would recommend to use the brightness at around 80%. It's bright enough for most rooms. If you're in a very bright sunlit room, you might find it isn't as bright as some other monitors you can find out there, specifically IPS panels. Moving on from that, you've got the color setup. For me, I use the user mode, and I put red to 44, green to 47, and blue to 50. That for me was the most color accurate display. It has got a dedicated sRGB mode if you so wish, and pre-assigned color modes as well that you can choose. Obviously, your mileage may vary, but that's the settings that I use and the ones I got the best sort of settings from. You've got picture boost, which it just enlightens a different element of the different part of the screen. You've got the OSD setup, which you can play around with, and then the gaming settings, which are going to be really important, and I'm going to allude to after. Game mode I would not suggest to put on because it does skew with all the colors and everything, but I would suggest to put low input lag mode on, overdrive to strong, and I'll get to that in just a bit. And of course, you can enable low blue mode if you want, in terms of reducing the blue light, and also you've got adaptive sync, enable or disable. For me, I have it disabled because I want low input lag mode to be enabled, and I want to have the access of MBR, which is reducing motion blur. So it's up to you in terms of what games you play and what sort of what you want from the monitor, but these are my settings and I just thought to share them with you. So that's it in terms of the OSD settings, and you were hopefully able to see that it runs at 144 Hz at 1440p. So now moving on to the actual picture quality, the VA based panel. Now in comparison to IPS panels, I did notice straight out of the box, and even after playing around with the color setting or even running on the sRGB mode, the panel does look a little bit washed out. By that I mean VA panels have this sort of tendency, they don't look as, not say crisp, but not as punchy as some IPS panels that I see out there, and it's very much the same case with this AOC monitor. It does feel a little bit washed out. But that said, if you're coming across at around 260 odd pounds for this sort of spec, it's perfectly acceptable. Colors are fine, and in terms of the contrast ratio, it's actually very impressive to see how the monitor does. So for example, over here you've got the green over here. It should be popping out even more. However, the contrast is really well done, specifically with the eyes and then the grass you've got over here. Moving on to this, again, the contrast is relatively good, but the colors don't pop as much as they should. The green trees over here should be really popping out a bit more from the screen. So you're not going to really be able to pick that from my camera, but I can just tell you that from experience of reviewing over 140 different monitors. So in terms of contrast ratio, it's decent. Color accuracy, it's not the best. Brightness, it's average, it's okay. But really, in terms of a gaming monitor at this price range, and on top of that for this spec, it's perfectly acceptable. Gamers will be perfectly happy with it. If you're photo or video editing, I would highly suggest you buy an IPS panel instead. It's not to say this is shocking, it's more the fact that if you really want a color accurate display, this isn't going to be the color accurate display. However, if you are a gamer, then you'll find it perfectly acceptable to actually use this on a daily basis. Speaking about gaming, let's jump straight into it. Now, I launched up Counter-Strike and I've played about 2,000 hours of competitive Counter-Strike, so I've got a bit of a feel of what I should expect from a monitor, and specifically reviewing over 140 monitors. It's something quite easy to test for me. Now, what I should say about the monitor is, even on the strongest overdrive setting, the monitor doesn't respond the fastest, even on the low input lag mode, which I know it hasn't to do with response time, but in terms of the input lag and in terms of response time, it's not the fastest, it's not the best. And there's a slight bit of inverse ghosting which occurs. You might not see it on camera, but sometimes a little bit of a trail that occurs by this wall when you move left and right, or for example, if I'm peeking, I might see a little bit of a trail happening over here rather than my actual enemy popping out. But on the grand scheme of things, it's perfectly acceptable. Again, your mileage may vary depending on how you want to use the monitor, but in my case, as I am very much a competitive gamer, I do like to not use G-Sync or FreeSync and just let the monitor run uncapped at, say, 250 odd FPS, running at 1440p with max graphics. So this is my case scenario, and by that I mean, would I use it for competitive gaming? I would say it's a little bit slow in terms of its response time and its input lag in comparison to other monitors available out there. That said, other monitors I'm talking about are hitting the 350 plus price tag for competitive 1440p 144 Hz panels with a decent color reproduction, in other words, not a TN based panel. So what I'm trying to say over here is that yes, you could use it for lower level competitive gaming, but when you start getting into a higher tier of competitive gaming, you'll probably want a faster response time and lower input lag monitor. However, for casual gamers, this is absolutely fantastic. Specifically, if you turn down the overdrive to medium, then the inverse ghosting is pretty much completely eliminated and you've got a decent response time of the monitor. Again, the input lag isn't the best, but as you're a casual gamer, you're not going to care about that too much. And therefore, I would say that this monitor is perfectly suited for people who are playing, let's say, Battlefield 5. You know, it's a FPS game, but it's not a competitive game like Counter-Strike where every pixel counts. So what I'm trying to say over here is this monitor is actually pretty impressive in terms of its response time and input lag, but it's more suited for casual gamers rather than a hardcore competitive gamer. So, overall, what do I make of this monitor? Well, considering it's around £260 for the specs that you're getting, I think this is an absolute bargain. It is based on the market in terms of more of a casual gamer and non-photo editor type of monitor. However, if that's you, and to be honest, most people I've come across on YouTube when they're looking for a monitor fall in that bracket, then I'd say this is a fantastic buy and almost a must buy if you're on a budget and you want a 1440p, relatively nice colors, and you want 144 Hz with pretty much everything on that comes out from the box, and specifically also a pretty decent build quality with a nice stand. So there we have it, guys. I would definitely recommend it. Do check down in the description below. I'll post down also alternatives that you might want to consider. There'll be more expensive alternatives, but they're worth considering. Alright guys, I've been Totally Dubbed. Take care and bye bye.